School trips abroad are a common affair for European teenagers. New places, culture, experiences. In the summer, thousands of children travel to different countries under the supervision of teachers. The system has been refined for decades, but sometimes a crack appears in this system and a nightmare seeps through. Summer in Brittany is one of the most picturesque regions of France. Green hills, the coastline, ancient villages. A safe and quiet place where school children from all over Europe come every year. The summer of 1996 was no exception. In mid-July, a group from Cornwall arrived. 40 English school children accompanied by 5 teachers. Among them was Caroline Dickinson. For any teenager, the first trip to another European country is a major event. The girl looked at everything around her with interest, soaking in the new impressions. She turned her head as the bus passed stone houses with sloping roofs. She photographed the narrow streets. She pressed her camera against the window to avoid reflections on the glass. The only thing that upset her was that her best friend couldn't come. Her parents didn't let her go at the last minute. Her mother asked a teacher to look after her daughter. However, despite her slight shyness, Caroline quickly settled in and made friends with the other kids. She laughed on the bus. She shared her chocolate bars. The group headed to the small village of Plaine Fougère. The organizers had booked a youth hostel there for 40 people. Plaine Fougère is a tiny place. A few shops, a couple of bars, a little over 3,000 residents. The streets are deserted after 7 in the evening. The street lights rarely turn on. The locals all know each other. They greet each other when they meet, stopping to talk about the weather. For Caroline, accustomed to English towns, this quiet French countryside seemed like something special, almost magical. The air smelled of the sea and freshly cut grass. On July 18th, the group checked in. The hostel building was old, with thick walls and wooden beams under the ceiling. The girl enjoyed spending time with her new acquaintances. She became particularly close with Camille. Camille was from a neighboring school, but it was as if they had known each other their whole lives. However, they were placed in different rooms. Camille's room had bunk beds, and Caroline decided to stay the night there. She brought her mattress and laid it out on the floor between the beds. Her sleeping bag was blue, with the school crest stitched on it. The girls talked for a long time before falling asleep, in whispers so as not to disturb the others. They discussed the boys in their group. They made plans for the next day. Then they softly sang a song about stars until they started to drift off. Their voices grew quieter. Their words became jumbled. Their breathing more even. Camille was the last to close her eyes. It was the last peaceful moment of that night. In the morning, when everyone woke up, Caroline was lying where she had settled, on the floor between the beds. But her posture was strange, not at all like when she had fallen asleep. Unnatural. One arm was thrown above her head, the other clenched into a fist. Her eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling, an unseeing gaze. They called her name. No reaction. They touched her shoulder. She was cold, hard. Her skin was waxy, with a grayish hue. A scream erupted in the room. Not right away. First there was a pause, a couple of seconds, as the brain processed what it was seeing. Then the scream. The teachers came running. The first to run in was a woman in a bathrobe, her hair disheveled. What they saw sent them into shock. One of the teachers grabbed the doorframe. Her legs gave way. They immediately called the police. They dialed the number with trembling fingers. The gendarmes who arrived understood at once. It had happened. An experienced eye scanned the room, lingering on the scene. The circumstances were horrific. The entire village of Plaine Fougère was frozen in terror. Nothing like this had ever happened here. The last crime had been about 20 years ago, and that was just a bar fight. The children were in such a state that it was impossible to talk to them. They sat in silence, withdrawn, staring at a single point. Some hugged their knees. One girl was rocking back and forth, back and forth. She had been sexually assaulted. The consequences of the incident were irreversible. A wad of cotton was found deep in her throat, which had blocked her airway. The medical examiner carefully removed it with tweezers and placed it in a plastic bag. Caroline was a diligent student, hard-working, with good grades. She always brought her report card home with pride. She was kind, responsive, and played the clarinet in the school orchestra. She sat in the front row of the wind section. An ordinary girl. The incident shocked everyone. The children's families and the quiet French village where nothing of the sort had ever happened. The local residents seemed paralyzed. They spoke in whispers, even at home behind closed doors. They were afraid to say out loud what had happened. They avoided the hostile building. They crossed to the other side of the street. There were many unexplained aspects to the case. The main question: how did the perpetrator get into a room where 5 people were sleeping, remain unnoticed, and kill his victim without waking anyone? How was it even possible to do that? Enter, carry out the plan, leave, and no one heard a thing. How did he even get into the building past the teachers and security? The answer was found quickly. Too quickly to be reassuring. Due to fire safety regulations, the emergency exits couldn't be kept locked. Some of them were left completely unsupervised. Just a door with a faded emergency exit sign, its green paint peeling. Any stranger could enter through these doors unhindered. A push, and that was it. It didn't even require any effort. The hinges were oiled, they didn't creak. When the girls from that room had recovered a little, the police were able to question them. The conversation took place in the kitchen, far from the scene. They were given sweet tea. 2 of them remembered strange details. One woke up during the night, the clock on the wall showed 10 to 4, and heard quiet moans, sounds of movement from Caroline's direction, muffled as if through a pillow. She thought her roommate was just having a nightmare and went back to sleep. She turned onto her other side, pulled the blanket up higher, and closed her eyes. Another girl, around the same time, maybe a little later, maybe earlier, she couldn't remember exactly, saw a shadow glide across the room toward the exit, a silhouette almost indistinguishable in the dark, tall, slouching. She thought one of the girls had gone to the toilet, or maybe one of the teachers had peeked in to check on them. There were no screams, nothing that would have raised alarm, just the usual nighttime sounds of a hostel, the breathing of sleeping people, the rustle of sheets, a tap dripping somewhere. The investigation pieced together a rough picture of events. That night, Caroline was sleeping on the floor between two bunk beds. She wanted to be near her friends. Around 4 in the morning on July 18, an unknown person entered the hostel through an unlocked door. Perhaps he had been there before, studying the building. He knew where everything was. He went up the stairs, slowly, carefully. The steps didn't creak. The building was relatively new. He saw the girl sleeping on the floor. He chose her because she was lying apart from the others, easiest to get to. He shoved a large wad of cotton into her mouth, presumably so she couldn't scream. He had brought it with him, prepared in advance. He committed his crime. He acted quietly, methodically. Then the motion sensor turned off, and the light went out. The corridor was plunged into darkness. The timer was set for 15 minutes of no movement. Around this time, one of the teachers looked out the window. Some noise had woken her up. A knock? A creak? The sound of an engine? She couldn't say for sure. She rubbed her eyes, got out of bed, and walked barefoot to the window. She moved the curtain aside. She saw a motorcycle driving away from the building. Its headlight cut a yellow stripe across the asphalt. The red taillight dissolved into the darkness. She thought it was just someone passing by, maybe a local resident coming home late. The woman checked the rooms just in case. She walked barefoot down the corridor, the floorboards cold under her feet, and peeked through the slightly open doors. All the children were in their beds and seemed to be asleep. Their breathing was even and quiet. Someone was sniffling. Someone was muttering in their sleep. She didn't turn on the lights and wake everyone. There was no reason to. She returned to her bed. She covered herself with the blanket. Later, her account would be used to create the first composite sketch of the suspect. She remembered the face in the light of a street lamp. For a second, no more, but she remembered it. The investigation was conducted in complete secrecy. Details were not disclosed. The parents of the other children were told the minimum, only the bare essentials. An incident had occurred. An investigation was underway. The children were safe. The locals were told the same. People discussed it in whispers at the bar, but no one knew anything for sure. This was in stark contrast to British practice, where in such cases press conferences are held and the public is involved to gather information. Cameras, microphones, appeals to witnesses. Nevertheless, the French approach yielded a result with surprising speed. Just 2 days later, it was announced. A man who confessed to the crime against Caroline Dickinson had been arrested. The announcement came on a Wednesday morning. The suspect turned out to be 40-year-old Patrice Padet, a homeless man with a criminal past. He was immediately investigated. The man had convictions for violent assault and battery, a list 3 pages long, plus an addiction to alcohol and drugs. His lifestyle also raised questions. He slept wherever he could, in parks, under bridges, sometimes in abandoned buildings. He had been seen in the area that week. A witness claimed that Padet had been asking for change near the shop the day before the incident. But biological material from the perpetrator had been collected from Caroline, DNA. Padet's samples were taken for analysis and comparison, a mouth swab, a blood sample. The results came back a few days later, a sealed envelope stamped by the lab. There was no match, 0%, not a single marker. The main suspect was off the hook and crossed off the list. They apologized and let him go. No other candidates were found. The investigation was back to square one. 0 leads, a dead end. Caroline's remains were sent to her parents in England after all the examinations were complete. A zinc-lined coffin, transport documents. The coffin was sealed. The last time they would see their daughter would be in photographs. A crowd came to the funeral. The church couldn't hold everyone. People stood outside in the cemetery. Everyone hoped the culprit would be found quickly. The priest spoke about it in his sermon. But several months passed. Nothing. Summer turned to autumn. A year went by. The same story. The investigation stalled. No news. No updates. The files lay in a desk drawer. The French police began to be criticized for their lack of professionalism and their flawed approach. Articles appeared in English newspapers. They had thrown all their resources at Patrice Pod, who turned out to be innocent, and let the real perpetrator get away. The police's inaction prompted Caroline's father, John Dickinson, to travel to Brittany himself on the anniversary of the incident. He bought a ferry ticket, crossed the English Channel, and drove to the village in a rented car. He publicly thanked the locals for their help, reminded them of the tragedy, and urged people to report any information, no matter how insignificant it seemed. His voice trembled. He read from a piece of paper he had written at home, rehearsing in front of the mirror. He pleaded for help in catching the person responsible. He stood in the square in front of the hostel, in the very place where his daughter had been taken away a year ago. The people listened in silence. Some cried. An old woman crossed herself. The parents were furious with the work of the French detectives. No transparency, no public involvement. They hardly searched for witnesses. There were no announcements on television. It was as if the case had been filed away in a drawer and forgotten. A folder on a shelf, gathering dust. So the parents began their own investigation, despite barely speaking French and having no idea how the justice system in France worked. They learned everything from scratch. They hired translators. They paid £100 an hour. They read the laws, the French Code of Criminal Procedure, a thick book in a blue cover. They called lawyers, international ones, specializing in cross-border cases. It took a massive amount of time, but the conclusion was the same. The methods being used were extremely ineffective. The parents were shocked when they learned that even the fingerprints at the crime scene had been collected carelessly. The technician arrived 3 days later, by which time half the surfaces had already been wiped down. In the first few days, investigators just went from house to house talking to residents. They asked general questions. Did you see anything suspicious? They didn't really take notes. The notebook in their pocket remained closed. And yet, the lead detective refused to collect DNA samples from all the men in the village, and there weren't that many of them, maybe 300 or 400. He said it would violate the citizens' rights. Given that the perpetrator had acted with cold calculation, this seemed absurd. The victim's father was certain. The culprit either lived here or somewhere nearby and knew the area perfectly. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to come and go so easily, unnoticed. He knew where the unlocked doors were. He knew the layout. Maybe he had even been here before, casing the place. The deeper the parents delved into the French police's work, the more outraged they became. Every new detail added fuel to the fire. Eventually, they contacted the Foreign Office to put pressure on the heads of French departments and demand a proper investigation. An official letter on letterhead. The campaign they launched yielded results in August 1997. Articles appeared in the newspapers. The Times ran a front-page headline. Letters were sent to officials. A petition gathered 5,000 signatures. The media descended on the gendarmes with criticism. This even led to the detectives who originally led the case being removed, quietly, without any announcements. One day, they just stopped coming to work on the case. The new lead investigator immediately saw the mistakes that had been made. He opened the case file and just shook his head. They decided to re-examine the scant evidence and double-check most of the information. More than a year had passed since the incident, so this was difficult. Witnesses' memories had faded. "I don't remember exactly. I think, maybe." Details had blurred like a photograph underwater. Key witnesses were re-interviewed. They were invited to the station, offered coffee. Based on their testimony, an updated composite sketch of the alleged culprit was created. The artist worked for 2 days. The facial lines were more precise, the details clearer, the shape of the nose, the set of the eyes. The information was immediately made public so as not to repeat past mistakes. Leaflets were posted throughout the region. In addition, the court granted the parents' request to conduct a mass DNA collection from all the men in the town where their daughter died. The judge thought for a long time, then signed the order. This became the first case of its kind in the history of forensic science in Brittany. Caroline's father was convinced the perpetrator was a local. The logic was simple. He knew the layout. He knew the time when everyone was asleep. But when the samples were compared, no matches were found. One by one, the men were ruled out. 350 men were tested. All were clean. They had to find other approaches, expand the search area, not just the village, but the surrounding area, a 30-kilometer radius. And it was here that the new detective discovered a curious connection to a case in the neighboring town of St. Malo. It turned out that on the same night Caroline was attacked, an unknown person had broken into a youth hostel in St. Malo where students were staying. They had also come to Brittany on a tour, just like the English schoolchildren. The stranger entered a room where 4 teenagers were sleeping. The door was ajar, but he was immediately spotted. They turned on the light and raised an alarm. A scream woke up the entire floor. He fled. He ran out into the corridor and disappeared. He ran down the stairs without even trying to explain himself. The behavior matched what happened in the hostel where Caroline was attacked. The same signature, the same manner, the same confidence of movement. It's likely that after the failed attempt in St. Malo, the perpetrator drove 25 kilometers and found a new victim. On a motorcycle, that's a half-hour ride. Like other important leads, this information had been completely ignored in the initial investigation. They simply hadn't connected the two incidents. Different towns, different gendarmeries, information was not shared. Since no one was harmed in St. Malo, there was little data. A report was filed, but the case was closed a week later. But the 4 witnesses from that room had seen the likely culprit up close in the light. His face, his clothes, a dark jacket, jeans. His build, medium height, slim. They were found and questioned. One had already gone home to Germany, so they had to contact him by phone. They helped refine the composite sketch. The cheekbones were a little different. The chin was sharper. The hair was shorter, almost a buzz cut. Information about the suspect, a perpetrator who preys on youth hostels, was sent out all over France. Faxes were sent to all prefectures. An alert was sent to all similar establishments. Be vigilant. Check your doors. Install extra locks. In parallel, they began to gather information on similar cases: assaults, sexual abuse, illegal entries into hostels. They called hostels, questioned administrators. There wasn't much data, but the list of suspects gradually grew. By the end of 1997, there were about 3,000 men from the region who could have been involved. A list in an Excel spreadsheet, hundreds of rows long. To find the real culprit, all of them had to be tested, have their DNA samples taken and compared. This number of tests took almost 2 years. Slow, painstaking work. Each one was summoned, a swab was taken, and they waited for lab results. The investigators worked diligently. Soon, they noticed that the same name kept popping up in the case materials: Francisco Arce Montes, over and over again. Different cases, different years, but the same name. A 47-year-old Spanish citizen with an extensive criminal record across Europe. His file was thick. The folder wouldn't close. He was first arrested in Germany in the 80s, given 5 years for sexual assault. He served 3.5, got out on parole. Then there was an assault in the Netherlands, a few months in prison, a suspended sentence in the end. The next arrest, 1994, France, an attempted assault in a youth hostel. His description was a perfect match for the composite sketch created from witness statements. Height 1.75 m, slim build, angular facial features, prominent cheekbones. When detectives examined the man's criminal record, they discovered he had at least 10 episodes across Europe, and he operated with the same method everywhere. His signature was recognizable. All the crimes were sexual assaults on girls and teenagers in youth hostels. Always at night. Always through unlocked doors. He never broke in or forced his way. He just found an open door and walked in. Unfortunately, they couldn't track him down right away. The likely reason was that the man was a migrant, constantly moving between countries. He could be anywhere in Europe or even beyond. No permanent registration, no address, no traces. He paid in cash, never registered anywhere. By the late 90s, the name Francisco Arce Montes was known to all law enforcement agencies in Europe. Interpol had a file on him, but it was as if he found out he was wanted in connection with Caroline's case and vanished. Until the early 2000s, there were no traces. Cameras didn't see him. Witnesses didn't encounter him. The man was the perfect candidate from the entire list of suspects. But to be absolutely sure and rule out the others, they needed to catch Francisco and get a DNA sample from him. Meanwhile, the checks continued. One by one, names were crossed off the list of 3,000. The work was slow but methodical. Francisco hid so successfully that even the victim's parents, at one point, began to doubt whether he would ever be found. Years passed. Caroline would have been in high school by then. Hope was fading. But they did not give up. Everything changed on April 1st, 2001, almost 5 years after what happened to Caroline. On that day, another article about the girl's death was published in an English newspaper, but this time with details. The name and photo of the main suspect, Francisco Arce Montes. A black and white photograph. Gaze averted. Hair cut short. A scar above his eyebrow. That same day, an immigration officer at an American airport went to lunch. He grabbed a sandwich from the cafeteria and sat down at a table. He picked up a newspaper that a tourist had left on the table and came across the article about the Caroline Dickinson tragedy. He flipped through the pages, chewing his sandwich. The man was surprised that, after so many years, the perpetrator still hadn't been found. 5 years is a huge amount of time. He saw the main suspect's name for the first time. Out of curiosity, he decided to check if this Francisco Montes had ever visited the US, just to see. His work was routine. He wanted something interesting. He entered the name into the computer, a database search. The cursor blinked. To his amazement, he immediately found a very similar surname, Arce Montes. The date of birth and photo were an exact match with the information from the newspaper. The same person. His heart began to beat faster. He kept digging and found out this man had been arrested in Florida just 2 weeks prior. A suspicious man had been detained in Miami Beach during another assault. One March evening, a group of students from Chile were on vacation there. They had all checked in to a youth hostel on the coast, a few hundred meters from the beach. The building was old, with peeling paint. The balconies were rusty. That same evening, a stranger entered one of the rooms. The door was unlocked. The girls had gone out onto the balcony for a smoke. He was caught by 2 of the students. They came back sooner than he expected. They asked him what he was doing there. Their voices were sharp, frightened. One of them grabbed her phone. He said he had the wrong room and immediately fled. He darted out into the corridor, almost at a run. The girls were alarmed, but didn't report it. They figured the man was just drunk and had genuinely made a mistake. There was a smell of alcohol. Maybe a tourist got lost. However, the next day, a man fitting this description was spotted at the same hostel. The administrator recognized him. He had seen him in the hallway the day before. He was caught again in someone else's room, acting suspiciously. He was standing by a bed, looking at a sleeping girl. Just standing and watching. He was seen around 2 in the morning, after which he disappeared again, claiming he had mixed up the room number. A second group, 4 Irish students, immediately called 911, reporting a break-in and what had happened. The dispatcher took notes, asking questions. One of the girls claimed she had been sexually assaulted, provided her underwear for examination, and agreed to all necessary tests. She spoke quietly, her eyes on the floor. Her hands were clenched into fists. The police found the mysterious perpetrator the next day, when one of the Irish students recognized him. The girl had been in the room he broke into, and now she saw the suspicious man strolling by the pool as if nothing had happened. Shorts, a t-shirt, sunglasses. He was lying on a sun lounger, reading a magazine. She immediately called the police. Her hands were shaking. She could barely dial the number. He was arrested. Two police officers approached the pool and asked for his documents. Curiously, when first approached by detectives, he refused to give his name. He remained silent. He stared at the wall. His jaw was clenched. He was then taken to the Miami precinct for questioning. They handcuffed him and put him in the car. The unknown man denied any involvement in the strange events at the hostel. He sat relaxed, one leg crossed over the other. During the conversation with the police, he eventually gave his real name, Francisco Montez. He said he was traveling alone. He had spent a lot of time in South America, countries in Europe, including Germany and France, and was now traveling across the United States. He listed cities, dates. During the interrogation, he made strange and incriminating remarks. He insisted he had done nothing illegal, just accidentally walked into the wrong rooms while drunk.
Francisco asked irritably several times if masturbation was illegal in the U.S., implying his actions were harmless. His voice grew louder. He banged his fist on the table. He behaved defiantly and was frankly bizarre. The detectives exchanged glances. In the end, he took a DNA test and was detained pending further investigation. A blood sample, a swab. When the airport officer read the police report on Francisco Montez, he was struck by the similarity of the case in the Miami hostel to the events in France related to what happened to Caroline Dickinson. Too many coincidences. He understood. The likely perpetrator could be released on bail at any moment, and he would disappear again, vanish, buy a ticket to Mexico, and that would be it. So he immediately tried to contact the French police. He found the number for the gendarmerie in Brittany. Unfortunately, he didn't speak French, and the woman on the other end of the line didn't understand English.
But during the conversation, he kept repeating the name Caroline Dickinson, over and over, slowly, syllable by syllable. Eventually, the dispatcher gave him a phone number. She wrote it on a piece of paper and read it out. This is how he managed to reach a retired British consul who had worked for many years as a translator for the local gendarmerie. At first, the man was annoyed by the early and unceremonious call from a stranger, but he quickly realized the situation was serious. His tone of voice changed. He became focused, businesslike. The airport officer laid out all the information he had, providing data from the police reports, case numbers, dates, names. The former consul also noticed the striking similarity between these assault cases. The same pattern, the same details, the same phrases. "I got the wrong room." Finally, there was a real chance to solve Caroline's case. But there was a huge problem: the distance. At any moment, Francisco could be released on bail and disappear again, heading to any corner of the world. An ocean between them. Now they worked together. The airport officer contacted the Miami police. He did everything he could to persuade his American colleagues to keep Francisco in custody for as long as possible to conduct the necessary checks. He called several times a day. He explained the importance. In parallel, through the former consul, they communicated with the French detectives. The time difference meant they had to make calls at night. They were finally able to convince them by providing not only the name, but also Francisco Montez's date of birth. It matched the data held by the French authorities, to the day. It turned out that after wandering around Europe, Francisco had gone to the States and was working there as a long-haul truck driver. He drove trucks on the highways, thousands of miles a week. He slept in his cab, ate at roadside diners.
Finally, after his arrest in Florida in March 2001, he was identified as the prime suspect in the case of Caroline Dickinson, which had occurred in France 5 years earlier. By this time, the young people who had been attacked in Miami identified Francisco as the man who had entered the hostel rooms. A lineup. They all pointed to him. This made it possible to hold him long enough. To compare the DNA, the results of the analysis of the biological material found on Caroline were sent from France, an envelope with a red seal. This was the moment of truth for the European investigators and the parents. A few days later, the results came in, a fax with numbers. The paper crawled slowly out of the machine. The match was nearly 100%, 19 out of 20 markers. The extradition of Francisco Montes from the U.S. to France took 6 months. Paperwork, approvals, court hearings. His lawyers tried to delay. It took another 2 years to secure a confession.
The man admitted to sexually assaulting the girl in France, but claimed that what happened to Caroline Dickinson was an accident. He didn't mean to. He didn't plan it. The cotton wad had accidentally gone in too deep. He also claimed he suffered from mental illness and therefore was not responsible for his actions. His attempt to avoid punishment on grounds of insanity failed after several evaluations. 3 psychiatrists examined him independently. The specialists declared him sane and fit to stand trial. He had diagnoses, but they weren't that serious. Throughout the trial, the accused spoke little, mostly in Spanish. A translator sat beside him, speaking into a microphone. Francisco always appeared relaxed. He would lean back in his chair, yawn. He showed not the slightest hint of remorse. He had to testify, and in broken French, Francisco described how the incident occurred. His accent was heavy. Words came out with pauses. The prosecutor asked him to repeat himself several times. According to him, he was traveling from Rennes to Plaine Fougère, then planned to return to England, where he was living at the time. He got lost and was looking for a place to sleep in the only building in the small village where a light was still on. It was late. Everything else was closed. It was the youth hostel. He went inside at night and saw that everyone was asleep. Silence, only the breathing of sleeping people. He began to look around the rooms and noticed Caroline, who seemed like an easy target, sleeping on the floor, alone, separate from the others, vulnerable. Francisco approached, covered her mouth with his hand, and began to assault her. The girl woke up and tried to scream. He sexually assaulted her and accidentally suffocated her with a wad of cotton. He got scared and fled. He got on his motorcycle and rode away. He didn't look back. During the trial, Francisco even asked the victim's parents for forgiveness, stating, "I know the Dickinson family will never forgive me." He said this monotonously, without emotion. He was reading from a piece of paper written by his lawyer. The victim's parents, by then divorced, were present at the trial with their younger daughter and gave testimony. They sat in the front row. The mother and father said their daughter was still a little, innocent girl who just wanted to see the world and visit other countries. Her dream was beginning to come true on this trip. Her first time abroad, her first time without her parents. The parents had let Caroline go on the trip without any hesitation, considering France a safe country and their daughter to be under the reliable supervision of her teachers. The group was supposed to visit several interesting places with tours. No one imagined how the trip would end. Otherwise, they would not have let her go. Never. They did not forgive the perpetrator. They looked at him with hatred. The mother cried. The father clenched his fists. The trial revealed details of the defendant's life. A forensic psychiatrist testified for 2 hours. His mental health problems began in his teenage years. Symptoms of OCD appeared. He was literally obsessed with hygiene. He would open doors and turn on lights using a handkerchief, tried not to touch anything with his hands, and meticulously washed everything with mineral water and soap several times. His hands were constantly red from washing. The skin would crack and bleed. In his 20s, Francisco developed his first problems. Upon learning of this, acquaintances sent him to a psychiatrist who diagnosed him with depression and progressive schizophrenia. He was prescribed pills. Francisco didn't take them. In the mid-70s, he left his native Spain and began traveling around Europe. He lived a nomadic life, working odd jobs as a waiter, a hotel doorman, or a driver. But he lived mainly on money sent by his father. Transfers came once a month. His father was wealthy and owned a business. One acquaintance described how the defendant knew all the youth hostels in Europe and preyed on young girls. He made maps, marked addresses, a notebook with addresses, evidence in the case. He was interested in very young girls. He considered those over 20 to be old. This same friend recounted that once, during a conversation, Francisco admitted he saw nothing wrong with killing a person. He said it calmly, as if discussing the weather. Everyone passes away sometime. It sounded terrifying. For a time, the defendant had a girlfriend whom he sexually abused. She even had a son with him, but eventually left due to the abuse. She fled in the night with her child. She left a note. Then he set off on a new journey, where he began to attack and assault others. Finally, on June 14, 2004, after a 3-week trial, 54-year-old Francisco Montes was unanimously found guilty of Caroline's murder and sexual assault. The jury reached a verdict in 4 hours. The perpetrator was sentenced to life in prison. The judge read the sentence for 10 minutes. The victim's parents breathed a sigh of relief. Their shoulders slumped. The mother covered her face with her hands. They believed that 8 years of waiting for justice and their activism had led to the conviction of the man responsible for what happened to their daughter. But the ordeal did not end there. As soon as the opportunity arose, the convict immediately filed an appeal. His lawyer brought the documents to court. Preparations for a new trial took another year. The case went to court by June 2005. Francisco was found guilty again, but his sentence was reduced to 30 years, with eligibility for parole after 20. He later filed another appeal. However, the man later withdrew it. Just like that, without explanation. His lawyer shrugged. Everyone was struck by the defendant's list of crimes. Just reading it out took about 10 minutes. The court clerk read in a monotone. In the 20 years leading up to his life sentence, He committed 4 assaults in Germany and 14 in Spain. There was another attempt in France. It preceded the incident with Caroline. Obviously, the real scale of the crimes committed by this man could be many times greater, but the trial only addressed the officially recorded cases where victims went to the police. How many did not report is unknown. Fear, shame, distrust of the police. Curiously, the other victims survived. It's possible Caroline was his only victim who did not survive. However, American detectives who studied his case believe he is responsible for a series of attacks in the US and Europe. There just isn't any proof. The connections were not established. After the conviction, serious questions arose. Why hadn't he been stopped all this time? He could have been arrested in Spain in the autumn of 1997, a year after what happened to Caroline, but he evaded justice. The obstacle to transferring the criminal to the French gendarmerie was the lack of established cooperation between the law enforcement agencies of European countries. Bureaucracy, borders, different languages, different systems. The victim's parents also pointed this out. The victim's mother and father did not rest after Francisco's conviction. They continued to raise the issue of the lack of cooperation between the authorities of different countries. They wrote letters to MPs, to ministers. They spoke at conferences. They were invited to Brussels, to Strasbourg. Because of this, criminals cross borders and remain unpunished. The victim's parents advocated for the creation of an international DNA database. They always referred to their daughter's story. They showed her photograph. This case became a significant example. It demonstrated that with international agreements, even across different continents, a heinous crime can be stopped. For Francisco, the legal proceedings in Caroline's case were not over. In 2015, the convict was found guilty of sexually assaulting a young woman, an incident that occurred a year after the case with the schoolgirl. He was extradited to Spain for a trial concerning the sexual assault of an 18-year-old girl. The man had lured the victim by letting her into the apartment building where she lived with her family, claiming she had lost her keys. He then attacked her, threatening her with a knife, and sexually assaulted her. For this crime, he was sentenced in Spain to 1 year in prison. After that, he was returned to prison in France to serve his life sentence. A 3 by 2 meter cell, a window near the ceiling, a cot, a table, a chair. Francisco's stream of appeals gradually dried up. After serving his sentence for what happened to Caroline, he will be extradited to Spain, where he must serve another 11 years. His earliest possible release date is 2038. However, it is unlikely the convict will live to see his 88th birthday behind bars. His age, health, and prison conditions are all against him.